All righty. There we go. I think we're live. Hello.
I don't know if they caught you dancing right before that. Hannah was just saying, we need some music when we begin this sort of thing. And then started doing this very strange robot. No, you didn't.
Well, we used to play music, and then YouTube doesn't like it. They think
YouTube. Yeah, they've been cracking down on us as big tech oligarchs.
Always just finding some problem to shut us up, right?
That's right. But it's not working.
Yeah, exactly. We'll tell you guys more about that in a minute. But hello. Come on in. Welcome to Monday night. It's our favorite night of the week. Come in. I've got people in the virtual studio from our Insiders Club and members in YouTube. It's so good to have you all with us. Happy Monday night. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well. And as I understand, I think this is our first live stream on Twitter as well. Are we live on Twitter?
We are live on Twitter. Hello, Twitter people. Let us know if you're watching.
Or X. We should probably say X,
I am never going to get used to that.
Yeah, especially when the address is twitter.com. It's a subliminal message. But regardless, whatever we call it, it's great to have everybody here. That's for sure. And an incredibly historic time right now.
On Rumble too. We are live on Rumble.
We're live on Rumble as well. Let us not forget Rumble as well.
Keeping up. Well, there's so much to talk about tonight. I mean, we're really on the verge of something big here. This is not just another story. I'm so excited to hear your take on this, Steve. But for those of you guys who are with us in the virtual studio, welcome. It's so good to have all you Insiders Club members. Go ahead and ask your question. If you are a member, the word question in front. Now, if you're just watching on Twitter or Rumble or YouTube, you can join us here in the virtual studio, in the community, and we'd love to have you here. This is the Courageous Patriot Movement. We are the people who are going to be fighting this to the end. And no matter what big tech does to us, if they try to put us in social isolation, we're not going to have it. So come join us in the fun group. You can just click the link in the description. And it's a fun group, but it's actually much more important than that. We are doing some really important things here and building up a movement that's building the parallel economy, which more and more is needing to happen clearly.
And you're going to be doing a boycott update, are you not?
Oh, I am. We're doing that tonight for all you Insiders members, and you definitely want to watch that. I'm sorry, but it has to do with another transgender activist. You get to see some fun photos, but you want to know who it is, so you definitely want to come on over and see that. Always fun to talk about those topics, Steve.
They are, yeah. And right. There's always just for the mill there, grist for the mill. It's just it never stops. It's the gift that keeps on giving, unfortunately.
Yes, absolutely. Well, come on in, everybody. Like I said, if you are here in our virtual studio, please let us know where you're from and put your question in, and we'll get to some of those. We're going to probably answer a couple Insiders questions before we hop over to Insiders exclusives as well. But Steve, the number one question on people's minds, of course, is civil war.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really big deal. And what's the latest? I know we've got lots of things happening today. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, of course, we have this big convoy that's coming down to Texas. It should be there in the next couple of days. It's doing a bunch of stops in the process. It's coming from all over, but primarily, apparently, Norfolk, Virginia was one of the main centers where it began. But it's one of those things that I'm sure is going to pick up as people are just going to want to get involved as it's going along. But you've got that. You've got members of Patriot militias from all across the country coming down to Texas and joining up with the Texas military department there, which is their own private military. Their own public state-specific military that cannot be under anyone else's jurisdiction other than the governor's orders. Those are all really neat things that are happening. But for me, I think really, and I'm going to give you guys some insight into what we talk about here in the Insiders Club, really diving very deep, drilling very deep into what's happening here. I think the Texas southern border is heating up into what is in many respects the chickens of Biden's whole presidency coming home to roost here at the southern border. I think the southern border is becoming a bona fide showdown between a rising red state-led alliance, a NATO-like red state alliance between 27 or 28 states, versus the slowly but surely imploding, decrepit Biden administration, the deep state in DC. I think we have to get a very big picture of what's happening here. This really is a clash between a new America that's rising up that represents a politics of restoration. It's technically what scholars call restoration politics. And this old, decrepit, dying globalist paradigm that continues to get life from the administrative state and donors and CEO billionaires, and is represented by Biden and Nikki Haley alike. We do not need Nikki Haley for president. We already have her for president. It's Joe Biden. Nikki Haley is literally qualitatively no different than bumbling Biden. Maybe Biden's smarter. That's the only thing I can think of, right? Bird brain, Hillary Haley. What's really happening at the southern border is that, and this is what you have to get, this is fascinating stuff. Texas is challenging the federal government at the most basic level of political power. Texas is challenging the federal government at the most basic level of political power. Everyone needs to get that. What you have to, keep very focused on is that the state, the modern state particularly, when all is said and done, is not merely an administrative authority, right? Or a bureaucratic institution. The state, the nation state, is by definition a territorial power. It is the administrative sovereign over a particular space. That's absolutely key to get in appreciating what's really happening here. The state is by definition a territorial power. It has borders, it has boundaries, it has territorial jurisdictions. And here's the key. When we begin to see those territorial boundaries openly contested in an interstate conflict like we're seeing right now on the southern border, make no mistake, this is a very real type of civil war. Now, it may not be a hot war, right? There's no guns going off here. But there is, hopefully, it won't ever be, but there is most certainly civil unrest such that the power and legitimacy of the dominant federal territorial sovereign is being challenged and effectively contested by the territorial sovereignty of states. So we are really seeing a war here. So what does it all mean? And again, it gets very profound the more I research this. It means that we do appear to be seeing the very real fragmentation of Washington, D.C.'s power happening right before our very eyes. Biden's administrative state and its ability to effectively govern does appear to be indeed crumbling. We saw that today when Border Patrol posted a tweet on X, making it very clear, check out my first video, making it very clear that if the Biden administration tries to get them to push back against and oppose Texas National Guard and the Texas military department there, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. They are going to disobey those orders. I mean, we are literally seeing Biden's power evaporating right in front of our very eyes. And Texas is doing this in a very, very slick way. It's very impressive. They are taking advantage of a massive loophole that the Supreme Court gave them, either intentionally or not, which was that the federal government having ultimate jurisdiction over immigration, they have the right to cut and dismantle the razor wire fortifications along the southern border. That was the decision of the Supreme Court. There's nothing in the decision that said that Texas troops have to give federal agents access to those razor wires. There's nothing that says that they can't keep putting up more and more and more razor wires after they're cut. So I think Abbott is playing this very cleverly, and he's forcing Biden in a no-win situation. If Biden does nothing, as I've said repeatedly in my videos over the last few days, ever since he gave that 48-hour or that 24-hour deadline for federal agents to have access to the razor wires. If Biden does nothing, he is exposed as being powerless. He is exposed as being a weakling, not just in front of the entire country, but in front of the entire world. And by the way, again, we'll talk about that in a sec. And then if he sends in the tanks, as it were, and forces federal agents into positions that begin cutting and dismantling the obstacles to the deluge of illegal migrants, then he is seen as lawlessly insane. So either he's seen as weak or insane. He can't win. But for me, what's even bigger here, there's even a bigger picture here to see, is how Texas, in challenging the federal government's territorial dynamics and jurisdiction, they are contributing to what may be seen as a kind of federal government power fragmentation, breakdown. So everyone's talking about, this is what I mean about the bigger picture here. Everyone's talking about Texas right now, right? How Texas independence is getting a huge boost as a result of that Supreme Court decision. People are saying, this is exactly why we need to secede. We need to be independent so we can defend our border. But we have to remember that secession actually often comes from something much bigger that happened first, which is what's called a larger state fragmentation. So oftentimes, and I don't know if it's the majority of times, but secession happens after a state fragments. So it's not like there's a referendum and then a particular region or population gains its independence and it leaves. Sure, that happens periodically, sure. But oftentimes what happens, perhaps just as many times, is that the larger state actually fragments. Its centralized power falls apart, and then a bunch of states then just declare their independence. It's very much like what we saw with the Soviet Union when it lost a third of its territories overnight back in 1991. In other words, while I don't necessarily think we're seeing the kind of fragmentation that will necessarily lead to secession movements, I do think that what we're seeing here with Texas and the rise of the 27 red states that are aligning themselves with Texas, we're not so much seeing secession from the nation as we are seeing the forcing of an otherwise tyrannical administration basically demonstrate how impotent its power is becoming. Its power is fragmented, particularly in relation to their territorial claims and how well they can exercise their power over us and our nation, and increasingly over the world. It actually works the other way. I'll show you that in a sec. Scholars have long recognized that the loss of territorial control, like we're seeing with the federal government over the southern border, inevitably leads to a radically weakened state, at least the perception of a radically weakened state, along with an accompanying boldness among, you know, population enclaves who see this as a chance to consolidate their own political sovereignty and self-determination from within that weakened nation. And that's exactly what I think we're seeing with the rise of the Red State Brigade, as it were, this new NATO. An attack on Texas is an attack on all, as these 27 states are saying. And if I can, again, just let me kind of finally, I think, mentally map this out for you here. Let me show you how I think the standoff at the southern border is basically the sum total of Biden's presidency, his absolute abject failure of a presidency in a nutshell. Okay. It's very, very interesting if you allow me the time here, but this is, I think, very important. Take out your notes and check this out. Scholars of secession and state fragmentation have studied the question in detail as to why some states basically fall apart. So, for example, at the end of the communist era, the old 20th century communist era, scholars ask the question, why did the Soviet Union fragment, but China didn't? Right? You can't just say, well, it's because communism failed. That's too simplistic, because you have to ask, okay, it failed in the Soviet Union, but not in China, not in North Korea. They didn't split apart. So what specifically was it about the Soviet Union that caused their government in Moscow to fragment? And the basic thesis that scholars are in wide agreement on is that states, in this case, the Soviet Union, if we're using that as an example, states that fragment first collapse geopolitically before they collapse internally. In other words, the argument goes, fragmented states actually fragmented outwardly first, in that they lose their international prestige, and then in turn, that causes them to lose their internal domestic prestige as well. So it's an external, internal movement. Keep that in mind. External, internal movement for a fragmented state. So what we saw in the Soviet Union was the more they tried to stretch their boundaries and exercise their authority and control over remote areas like Eastern Europe and Afghanistan, right, in December of 79, invading Afghanistan. The more the Soviet Union tried to stretch out their frontiers, the more they faced massive backlashes from those respective populations. And over time, they eventually actually lost complete control of that kind of world order, that Soviet world order they were trying to hold on to. Certainly by 1989, Eastern Europe had effectively rebelled against the Soviet Union, kicked them out. Afghanistan rebelled against the Soviet Union, kicked them out. So they lost face internationally. And then so what happened then is that a chain effect took place, so that the loss of international power began to affect the balance of internal power, such that that power was tipped in favor more and more in the peripheral regions of the Union, like the Baltic republics, Lithuania, which was the first, if I recall, to declare independence in 1990. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and then months later, they were followed by Armenia, Georgia. And so the key here is that the international geopolitical collapse of the Soviet Union actually led to its internal domestic collapse. The illusion of power that the central government in Moscow had and was able to maintain for so many decades imploded internationally, such that over just by nature, naturally, organically, it imploded in the hearts and minds of the people internally, who then rebelled and declared their independence from the system as a whole. I think the radical weakness that the Biden administration has demonstrated internationally, beginning with the botched Afghanistan withdrawal debacle and the total humiliating failure in Ukraine, along with the ongoing snubs that the Biden administration has been getting from the OPEC countries like Saudi Arabia that won't even return Biden's calls. All of this seems to be the catalyst, the international external catalyst for the domestic internal demise of Washington, D.C.'s power over Texas and the growing red state rebellion. Now, keep in mind, I don't think it's any coincidence that we're hearing about the Biden administration possibly authorizing military intervention in the Middle East tonight. You may have heard about that. That's what dying powers do, right? Like the Soviet Union did with Afghanistan in December of 1979. They stretch themselves too far internationally and only end up weakening themselves more and more domestically. They're more interested in the borders of nations 10,000 miles away in trying to run this global order than they are of their own borders. And then that leaves their internal population radically disaffected, and the central government begins to experience a crisis of legitimacy like we're experiencing today. Gang, that's what I see happening right now in Texas. I mean, regardless of how it all actually plays itself out, regardless of whether the Biden administration sends in the tanks, whatever, the way the Soviet Union would crush the uprisings in Hungary and then Czechoslovakia and Poland, those uprisings were indicative of these very dynamics that I'm talking about here. They were indicative of the fact that the Soviet Union was already politically fragmenting. The tanks were just duct tape trying to hold the whole thing together. And I think we're starting to see a comparable fragmentation in Washington, D.C. Very, very fascinating stuff.
So fascinating. Wow. I love the connections you make, Steve. I wouldn't have thought about that without you. That's so interesting. Well, for everybody who's here and just joining us, can you guys do me a favor? Comment in the chat if you can help me help Steve. I want to give you guys a quick update on our channel and the state of our channel. We have been allowed to repeal what's happened to us in the coming weeks. And so that means
appeal. They repeal, we appeal.
Thank you. Right. We peel something in a couple weeks and appeal. And that's going to put more spotlight on our channel, which means there's a very high risk something else could happen. So if you guys could do me a favor, there's a link in the description. The first step it asks you to do is just put in your name and your email. But no cost and nothing. Just put in your name and your email. This is so that we can keep in touch with you if something is going to happen here in the next few weeks. We don't know. So if you guys could please go and put your name and your email in that link that I put it on the screen here, join.turleytalks.com. That's incredibly important to us. If you come one day, you wake up and you want to see what Steve has to say, what's his analysis, we could be in the middle of a civil war, who knows? And it's not popping up, that's a very real reality. So if you could help Steve by putting join.turleytalks.com into your browser and putting your name and your email in, that's it. That just puts us on the list. Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, for virtual members, you're already, people in the virtual studio are asking me if they need to do this. No, you're already in the program. You're good. But the join@turleytalks.com is just for us to be able to keep in touch with you. Then you'll have the opportunity, if you want to come and join our movement, you'll be offered that invitation there too. So you guys, I know Steve's asked, but if you guys could do me a favor and do Steve a favor and just do that, it's very, very important. It's down in the description. It's also on the screen. You can type in join.turleytalks.com. That's very, very helpful for us to get your information in case something happens. So just want to give you guys an update. We'll, of course, let you guys know what happens in a couple weeks, but that's really great. So thank you, Steve. Just wanted to mention that for everybody.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask Steve, there have been rumors about, of course, Biden and Kamala not getting along. Seems like there's another type of civil war in the White House. There's some stories that are saying that she could be replaced. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that he could be running again without Kamala? I know there was tension in the initial race in 2020. Kamala was calling Biden a racist, and I think there's some problems there. Could he seriously be replaced, or she seriously be replaced?
It would be very hard. Again, it's a further indicator of what a disaster of a ticket this is. So just put that all in perspective, regardless of what happens, regardless of this, a healthy ticket is not talking like this. They're not talking about replacing their vice president because she's so horrible. Kamala has apparently some pretty loyal insiders in her sphere of the world that hates Biden. And the only thing that's, I think, holding him back, well, first of all, I don't know if they really have anybody else given the diversity hires that they have to do. I don't think Michelle Obama would go with, for example, a VP slot. I think the only fear that Biden would have is the retaliation that he would get from Kamala's inner circle were he to do something like that. He's already facing a literal meltdown in his coalition. Bill Maher was talking about this on Friday night, if I recall. I mean, Bill Maher, in the end, Bill Maher is going to vote for Biden. Don't make any mistake. At this point, he is so infected with TDS that I don't think he has any ability to vote for Trump, however red-pilled he gets at this point. But even he was saying Biden is down with the under 30 vote. Trump is winning the under 30 vote right now. Trump is winning the Latino vote in New York right now. That's why he's only down by single digits in a state that he lost by almost 30 points back in 2020. Biden is down with blacks. He's down with non-white working class voters. He is hemorrhaging his own base. So he has to be very, very careful what he does so as to not further alienate anyone else. And if he alienates Kamala, she has a small base, but again, it's enough to completely destroy him in the general election when a state comes down to 2 or 3 points. So I don't think he's going to change it. But the very fact that you're hearing rumors like this is indicative of just how what should we say? Yeah. I mean, red alert their campaign is. I mean, this is we're entering uncharted territories. We have never seen a candidate poll this low. Even he's polling even lower than Carter at this point. We've never seen someone poll this low and even come close to pulling off re-election.
Well, they had their first campaign rally last week. If you guys happen to see that, it seems their platform, Biden and Harris, is replacing Roe. I can't say words today. Repealing Roe.
Right. Right.
That's the only thing they have left that people could possibly stand on, is bringing back Roe. It's crazy. So what do you think is going to be the reception of that? Is there enough of an audience that is so upset about the overturning of Roe v. Wade that would be any help to them whatsoever?
No, not even remotely, not even kind of. I know there was some concern after Ohio, the Ohio referendum in 2022. But actually, post-mortem, it had a lot more to do with just how poorly pro-life forces operated in that referendum, not so much how successful the referendum was. No, Biden's doing that because he's getting the polling on women, particularly suburban women, and they're starting to they're defecting in droves. Every single, there's no one is outside of Trump. No politician is advocating any policy issue because it's right or because it's good, right? They've beta tested it. They look to see what galvanized voters the most to vote for them. That's it. It's a beta test. It's Bill Clinton 101. And what Biden and his cohort realized is that suburban women particularly are defecting in droves to Trump. And they realize they got to find some issue that at least stops the bleeding. And based on their research, they think that they found it. Now, the problem is, as you guys know, and a lot of you actually are a little upset at it, obviously, is Trump has actually been very moderate on the abortion issue because he can be. I mean, just again, from a politically savvy perspective, he can be. He got rid of Roe v. Wade. He appointed the judges that overturned Roe v. Wade. He could sit back and just take victory laps on that without having to prove his bona fides. And so what he's doing is he's sitting back and saying, look, I go with that decision. My view from the beginning is this is a states' rights issue. And if you want to argue against that and shove a one-size-fits-all view down all of our throats, and again, that has every bit, I think, the power to push back against this pro-Roe vote in terms of sovereign state rights like what we're seeing in Texas. So I just think in the end, they're trying to find something that galvanizes their own voters, which again is very is indicative of how weak and how code red their campaign is. Keep in mind, Trump is increasingly focusing. We talked about this, forget which video today. He's increasingly focusing on super majority issues, right? Border security, energy independence, which is a super majority support in the Rust Belt states and in the battleground states, and anti-wokeness, which even people like Bill Maher can't stand. So positions that are 60-65% support plus, like border security, which is 70%, he is hammering those issues, and he is literally bleeding Joe Biden dry with that.
Well, you mentioned suburban women, urban women, I'm sorry, turning, losing it tonight, Steve. Sorry, guys.
You got it. No problem. I know the feeling.
More and more women turning to the right. However, there's a study, I don't know if you saw this, it came out over the last week, that looked at women worldwide and their political affiliations. And women overall, this study seemed to say that women are more liberal than men. Is that women, because that's women generally, you're just talking about that one section, or what are your thoughts? Did you see that study?
I did not. I'd have to take, I'd have to take a look at that and see who they were sampling around the world. If it's women predominantly in the West, sure, because the West has enthroned emancipation and liberation as our number one value. We've effectively done that. So even in many respects, if you think about it, even MAGA politics is all about liberating us from the tyrannical nature of globalism and the WEF and the demons in Davos and bullies in Brussels and all that sort of stuff. So it still has this liberation like feel to it. Whereas in Russia, for example, it's more the culture wars are international. They're not civil wars. They're not fighting forces from within. They're fighting forces that are trying to invade. So it's like trying to fight Napoleon. So it's not emancipation, it's defend the homeland. And that's the way China appeals to the common imagination. It's the way Japan often appeals to the common imagination. India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, certainly the Sahel region right now in Africa. It's like, let's kick out all of the colonizers, the residue of colonization in our nation. So I'd have to see. Again, I wouldn't necessarily doubt it. But women too, generally are they're even in the West, they tend to be the majority churchgoers. They tend to be the ones, when the husband's out getting drunk with the boys, they're the ones who are keeping the house together and homeschooling the kids, whatever. I'm just giving your typical characterization. You're not trying to beat up on men here. But oftentimes women, at least historically, have been seen, ironically, as a very conserving force in society. So I don't, and with the rise of the trad wife, it'll be interesting to see. Maybe, again, it's something very similar to what we're seeing in demographics. Maybe that's the majority position, but it's also majority position of a dying and decaying percentage of the population, where what's a minority position now is part of the conservative retrad position that's growing and will be the majority in 2030. So I'd have to look at all the dynamics.
All right, I'll find it and send it to you. I
Awesome.
can't
Please
share it
do.
here, but as you guys will increasingly get to know, that's a topic that's very close to my heart. So tonight, you guys, we are going to be talking about all kinds of things. We're going to be talking about what's going on in the UK. We're going to be talking about judges. We're going to be talking more about what's going on at the border. We're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine, the war in Hamas, all those things. So if you want to come join us for the rest of that conversation, we'd love to have you. We'd love to answer your question. Just go to join.turleytalks.com. First, put your name and your email in so we can contact you. And the next page, you can put your info in and come join us here in the virtual studio and be a part of our movement. So with that, Steve, how about we switch over and get to our Insiders members?
That's it. Let's go to our virtual studio here. Absolutely.
Awesome. We'd love to have everybody else join us. Just click the link in the description. See y'all.